Hi, Mark Donovan here from Falcon Imagery, and today I'm going to go over the topic of logging cross-country times. As flight training students, we often have one column for cross-country flight time and log it in that particular column. But in reality, there's several different types of cross-country loggable time that can be beneficial depending on what you're actually, let's say, applying for a job, whether it be a airline pilot under Part 121 or charter pilot under 135, or your flight training requirements that you need for flight experience to go for a new certificate or rating. So we're going to go over all of that in this video. So follow along. All right, let's get into this. The many ways to log cross-country flight time. But before we do, make sure that like button and subscribe to the channel so you get notified when I come out with my next video. So there are about 7 different definitions for cross-country flight time, and we're going to cover all of those. The definition you use to record cross-country time in your logbook depends on what you need the cross-country time for. Per FAR Part 61.1 BI, loggable cross-country time requires A, conducted by a person who holds a pilot certificate, that includes a student pilot certificate, conducted in an aircraft, that includes a landing at a point other than the point of departure, and that involves the use of dead reckoning, pilotage, electronic navigation aids, radio aids, or other navigation systems to navigate to the landing point. So, by the FAA's definition, an 11 nautical mile flight from, let's say, Laconia, New Hampshire to Moultonborough, New Hampshire's airport is considered a cross-country flight, or I should say cross-country flight time. However, not necessarily for the purposes of getting cross-country flight experience for, let's say, getting a pilot certificate or a rating. But we'll go over the specifics on that why in a few minutes. So for that private pilot instrument commercial certificate student, per the FAR Part 61.1 BII, to meet the aeronautical experience requirements for a private or commercial pilot certificate and an instrument rating, or for the purposes of exercising recreational pilot privileges, cross-country flight time must include a landing at least at a straight line distance of more than 50 nautical miles from the original point of departure. So your destination airport has to be in a straight line at least 50 nautical miles away. So, does each flight leg have to be over 50 nautical miles for it to count as cross-country time under this definition? The answer is simple, no. As long as one point of landing is a straight line distance of at least 50 nautical miles away from the original point of departure, the entire route can count as cross-country flight time for certificate training requirements under Part 61.1 B, subset 2, or II. However, be aware that per Part 61.109, private pilot students must fly one cross-country flight of at least 150 nautical miles with at least one entire leg that's greater than 50 nautical miles straight line distance from takeoff to landing, along with a few other requirements that I'm not going to get into. And similarly, commercial pilot students have two 2-hour-long cross-country experience requirements per FAR Part 61.129 that asks pilots to include a single leg of at least 100 nautical miles to landing, along with a few other requirements. Again, much I'm not going to get into. So this specific flight experience requirement does not allow for any intermediate stops during the respective 50 nautical mile or 100 nautical mile legs of those flights. So don't mess this up while you're building your flight training experience, as it will stop your check ride before it even gets started. Now let's talk about the airline transport pilot certificate requirements. This is where things get interesting. A restricted ATP requires 200 hours of cross-country time experience minimum, some of which must have been flown as the pilot in command. To meet these requirements, any flight that is in a straight line distance of greater than 50 nautical miles away from the point of departure counts as a cross-country time under FAR 61.1 B, subset 6. So what does this specifically mean? For the restricted ATP certificate, you could, in theory, fly straight line distance of at least 50 nautical miles away from your point of departure, turn around, and then fly back to your airport that you took off from and log the cross-country flight time under Part 121 qualifying cross-country flight hours, without ever, again, landing at that other airport. This can happen for a few reasons. Say, for example, you flew to the destination airport that was greater than 50 nautical miles away from your departure airport, but due to an issue with the destination airport or runway, or changes in the forecasted winds at that airport, you decided to turn around and fly back to your departure airport. So as long as it was at least 50 nautical miles away, you can count that under qualifying Part 121 cross-country flight time, even though you didn't land at that airport that was beyond 50 nautical miles away. Similarly, when conducting instrument approaches to airports but not actually landing at them, that has you flying at least 50 nautical miles away from your departure airport in a straight line, you can count those for cross-country flight time hours qualifying for Part 121. As a CFII, I run into this situation quite frequently where we'll go to an airport that may be 50 nautical miles or much further than that, and we'll shoot some instrument approaches but not land at that airport. And I know that we've gone more than 50 nautical miles away from Laconia Airport, which I'm departing out of. We can, or at least myself, can log that time for Part 121 qualifying cross-country flight time. For the student, unless we land at an airport that's at least 50 nautical miles away as part of that IFR training, they're not going to be able to count it as a cross-country flight. So, for example, here, if I fly from Laconia to Portland, Maine, it's 49 nautical miles. And if I fly the RNAV 29 approach, it takes me out about 11 nautical miles further out over the ocean, or I should say from the center of the airport in Portland. So you can see here in the approach plate in the bottom left, you can see the depiction where you're supposed to do your procedural turn. You're several miles off the coast of Maine or Portland, Maine. And if you look a little more closely, as you can see here, if you're doing that procedure turn, you're at least 11 nautical miles away from the airport when you're at that SAPI waypoint. So a Part 121 qualifying cross-country flight for at least time building, even if you don't actually land at the Portland airport. You just want to be clear, though, that in your logbook that you state that you did this flight from Laconia to Portland, Maine, and you shot the RNAV approach with vectors or to initial approach fixed SAPI or something to that effect. Moving on to Part 135 pilot qualifications. This is for like charter flights. For, let's say, example, you worked at NetJets. So to act as a pilot in command under Part 135, pilots must have either 100 hours of cross-country flight time experience for VFR flights under Part 135, or 500 hours of cross-country time experience for IFR flights. These Part 135 requirements follow the FAA's basic definition of a cross-country flight as being point-to-point. So no matter how short the flight is, if your flight from a departure airport to a separate point of landing, another airport or a gravel bar, the flight is considered to be qualifying Part 135 cross-country flight time experience. The next category is the sports pilot certificate. And the sports pilot certificate now has become a little bit more popular with some of the changes in the Mosaic rules that have recently happened here. So per FAR Part 61.1B3, to meet the aeronautical experience requirements of a sport pilot certificate, cross-country flight time must include a point of landing with at least a straight line distance of more than 25 nautical miles from the original point of departure, and involve, as applicable, the use of dead reckoning, pilotage, navigation aids, radio aids, or other navigation systems to navigate to the landing point. And then we have military pilot qualifying for commercial pilot certificates. So per the FAR Part 61.1B7, a military pilot qualifying for a commercial pilot certificate may count any flight that is at least a straight line distance of more than 50 nautical miles from the original point of departure toward their cross-country time requirements for the commercial certificate. This regulation provides an exception for military pilots to log cross-country time towards a commercial pilot certificate, as an ATP candidate would, without a landing requirement separate of the point of departure. So why would that be the case? Well, Air Force and Navy pilots often fly very long sorties or missions to only return back to the departure airport after they've met their achievements of their sortie, without ever making a destination landing. So they'll go out from say North America and go to Europe and then come on back and land on some land terra firma here in the United States or on an aircraft carrier. And so they've done a very long cross-country flight, so they get to count those hours toward a commercial pilot certificate if they so choose to go get a FAA commercial pilot certificate. Then we have pilots based on small islands, let's say St. Thomas Virgin Islands or something like that. So per Part 61.111, for a pilot located on an island from which the cross-country flight training required in 61.109 of this part cannot be accomplished without flying over water from more than 10 nautical miles from the nearest shoreline, they need not comply with the requirements of that section in order to get their pilot's license. If other airports that permit civil operations are available to which a flight may be made without flying over water from more than 10 nautical miles from the nearest shoreline, the pilot must show completion of 2 round-trip solo flights between those 2 airports that are farthest apart, including a landing at each airport on both those flights. So if you're going from, let's say, possibly an airport that's located in St. Thomas to maybe one in St. John's, I don't think there's an airport there, but if there was, and it's within 10 miles within the water's distance, you'd be required to fly at least 2 flights there and land at those 2 different islands. Now, if you earn your pilot certificate using this exception, the FAA will place a limitation on your pilot certificate stating passenger carrying prohibited on flights more than 10 nautical miles from the appropriate island. Now, once the pilot meets the normal cross-country requirements under 61.109, the FAA will remove that restriction from the pilot certificate. Now, lastly, how do you fill out your logbook? Well, take advantage of your logbook's open columns, or relabel a column that you don't intend to use. Have columns for flight training, cross-country flights. Those are your most restrictive ones. And then add qualifying Part 121 cross-country flight column, and then add a Part 135 cross-country flight column. And as you can see here, if I get the pointer up here, I have my most restrictive cross-country flight time right here. This is for like flight training requirements. So if you're a private or commercial instrument student, you'd be putting your hours in here. But I also have 2 additional columns that I want putting together years later. One for point-to-point cross-country. This would be qualifying cross-country hours for, let's say, a Part 135 job if I wanted to go work Part 135. And qualifying Part 121 cross-country time if I was planning to go apply to the airlines and was trying to get all I needed to get to that minimum 200 of hours to get that restricted ATP. So that's it on the types of cross-country loggable flight experience that you can put in your logbook. Hopefully you found this video helpful. And again, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel so you get notified on my next video.